KERR9000'S game room.
Hiya, it's KERR9000 and welcome back to my channel and to my games room. Now today I'm going to be talking about a Mega Drive game. I'm going to be talking about Streets of Rage 3, which is a side-scrolling beat-em-up which was developed by Sega themselves with help of Yozu Koshiro's company Ancient Corp and was published by Sega in 1994 for the Sega Megadrive, or as the Americans will call it, the Sega Genesis. This is the third installment in the Streets of Rage series, and it's the last game in that series for a long time. You know, Streets of Rage 4 didn't launch until 2020. Okay, so before I get into too much depth on the game itself, I think I ought to tell my own personal tale with Streets of Rage 3, because that's the thing. Anybody can just bung it on and do a review. Anybody can sort of pick games apart, but each one of us has our own personal story with pretty much every game we've played. And this is a story which dates back to the actual time of the game coming out. Streets of Rage 3 came into my life, well, basically I played absolutely shed loads of the two earlier Streets of Rage games with my brother, and we owned them both. When the third entry came out though, we were sort of chilling off the Mega Drive a bit, saving up money, thinking about what future console we might end up with. So we rented Streets of Rage 3 from a local video game store. Well, I say local, it was about 30 minutes away, and it was on the outskirts of the next town over. It was a place called Video City. A lot of my stories about games and films all come back to this place. It was basically like a Blockbuster without the name. Basically, we had the game over the weekend and played the living heck out of it. I don't think either of us actually ended up purchasing it during the Mega Drive's lifespan, but I was lucky enough years later to pick it up for £35 at a video game store called Playtime in my local shopping centre. It sadly no longer exists. Actually, neither does the shopping centre. That's been knocked down. But the shop is one I'll always hold dear, because not only did I grab Streets of Rage 3 from there, but I also got my copy of Paper Mario and my copy of Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness from there for good rates before prices went like totally crazy. And this is a bit sad, but you know, I played a lot of Streets of Rage 1, 2 and 3 with my brother, and it's actually a real shame to me that as life's taken us down slightly different paths, I never got to play through Streets of Rage 4 with him, because it certainly makes me think of him and the great times we had. Okay, much like the previous two Streets of Rage games, Streets of Rage 3 is a side-scrolling beat-em-up in which either one or two players move through each stage fighting against waves of enemies until they reach and defeat a boss character ending the stage. Players can choose from returning characters Axel, Blaze, who of course were in number 1 and 2, and Skate from number 2, along with a new cyborg character who's called Dr. Zan. Personally, I think it's an absolute shame that neither Max Thunder from Streets of Rage 2 or Adam Hunter from the original Streets of Rage returned. But, you know, what can you do? I would complain that Streets of Rage had 3 characters. Streets of Rage 2 upped this to 4 selectable characters, and then Streets of Rage 3 has gone for 4 again, if not for the fact that the game has a few unlockable secret characters. 2 if you're playing the European or American versions, and 3 if you're playing the Japanese version. And this won't be the only regional difference that I'll be discussing. I want to briefly touch upon the character who was axed from the American and European versions, Ash. So Ash was this guy who looked like he was straight out of the Village People. He had what a friend has told me is a gay leather daddy style, which was legitimately a thing in the 80s and 90s, which matches with the time period this game is set in. It's not this which really is an issue, it's the way the character moves, in what can only be described as an ultra-camp, limp-wristed, mincing sort of fashion while performing ballet-style leaps in high heels. He slaps as an attack and giggles in a feminine way. The thing is, he doesn't have a lot of moves to his moveset. He is a very simple character. Like the other secret characters, he can't pick up any weapons, but this guy also has a really limited moveset, but his moves hit hard as sort of a payoff against that. Now, I hate getting a game with removed content because I always think it's wrong to give a region or a platform a lesser version of a game, but I can see why they did this. The only thing is, I imagine that they'll have removed it simply because it portrayed a gay person, which might have bothered some religious parents in America or something, and not because it was an obnoxiously offensive portrayal of a gay person. It has to be noted that even in the recent Japanese ROM of this game, which was provided on the second mini Megadrive console, the section with Ash and the ability to play as him has been removed. Now, I'm kind of against this censorship, as I feel it's papering over the problems and pretending it never happened. I'd sooner it be intact with the disclaimer, but that's just my opinion. I'm sure different people will feel differently about this whole thing. Anyways, getting back to my actual review, several tweaks have been made to the basic gameplay of the series in this entry following Streets of Rage 2. In 2, only Skate was able to run, and now each character can run, which sounds simple, but as you can now do a running attack with anyone, it has a pretty cool effect on the game's pace. You can also perform a vertical dodge roll to get out of the way quickly, and thanks to a new rechargeable meter, you have the option, once this is filled, to perform a special attack without actually losing any health. So it's plain to see that Sega really did try to build off the back of Streets of Rage 2 and offer something new to the fans. But it's important to realise that Streets of Rage 2 was very much held up as the gold standard for this style of game. You can't overstate how loved Streets of Rage 2 was. It was seen as being everything you could possibly want in a walk-along beat-em-up. It was just an absolute gem. The things that made it loved were the big detailed sprites, the gameplay and the music. The music in Streets of Rage 2, I believe, can be held up as some of the best 16-bit video game music of all time. It's timelessly cool, and it's just the kind of stuff that you can throw on away from the game and sort of still rock out to. It is something that you would have on your phone and listen to on the way to the work without even thinking where it came from. And it's something that I catch like running in my head every now and again. You just do. And you can't say that about a lot of games. Lots of games, once you're done playing them, that's it. Everything about them is forgotten, at least until you sit in front of them again. But simply put, Streets of Rage 2's music transcends the game. The soundtrack in the second game was influenced by electronic dance music, specifically house, techno, hardcore techno, with the soundtrack being considered revolutionary and ahead of its time. The soundtrack for the third entry is not quite so well regarded. The game's soundtrack was once again composed by Yuzo Koshiro and Motohiro Kawashima, and apparently features influences from Detroit's hard techno scene, which was popular in Tokyo nightclubs at the time of the game's development. It is interesting to note that for the soundtrack, Koshiro created a new composition method which he called the Automated Composing System, and he used this to produce fast beat techno-like jungle music. Fast beat techno-like jungle music. It was among the most advanced electronic music creation techniques at the time, incorporating heavily randomized sequences. This resulted in sounds generated automatically that, according to Koshiro, you ordinarily never could imagine on your own. This method was a very rare thing at the time, but has apparently since become very popular among techno and trance music producers. While I believe it was a massive technological step, and it's a very interesting development to talk about, I don't think it led to as strong a soundtrack as the previous game though. It sounds a bit more beepy and electric, and more like traditional game music, whereas I feel the music in the second installment had more of a realness to it, and I feel this is one of the strong reasons for Streets of Rage 3 being felt as it's a bit of a step back from the previous high entry in the franchise. I also kind of felt that the story always felt a bit more overcomplicated and weird than the story in the two previous entries, and this is probably down to the fact the version we received in Europe was very different to the original Japanese version. I think it's the right time now to go over a few regional differences, both relating to story and game content. When the game was localised from the original Japanese version to the English language release, significant changes were made. The clothing of the three returning heroes, Axel, Blaze and Skate, was altered from their original colours seen in the previous Streets of Rage games, which might sound like a small change, but I found it instantly jarring. This wasn't the end of the sprite jiggery-pokery. The female enemy characters were also altered to make them wear less revealing outfits than before, and the previously mentioned Ash character was removed. The game almost seemed to be full of pointless stylistic changes. Voice effects were also changed, with most noticeably Axel's catchphrase of Grand Upper for his special being replaced with the term Burning Knuckle. Bare Knuckle. I think a lot of this messing around sort of stuff led to the game have a slightly knock-off twinge to it, like Sega had subcontracted its production out. Another thing to note is that the Japanese version of the game's story opens up with a new explosive substance called Raxine being used in a bomb which explodes in the city and kills thousands of people. At the same time as this, a military general named Ivan Petrov vanishes. It's later discovered that Mr. X orchestrated the general's disappearance and plans to use Raxine to start a global war. The English version removes all references to Raxine. General Petrov was replaced by the city's chief of police, and the new plot involves a scheme to switch major officials with robot clones in order to control the city. It almost feels like they tried to baby down the plot a bit for us and make it a bit more sci-fi and a bit less terrible. Maybe this is because when the game was released, after all, it was around the time the Northern Ireland peace process, including the events leading up to the 1994 provisional IRA ceasefire, would happen, if my memory serves me correctly. So maybe they wanted to cut the talk of bombs out and stuff. Who knows? I do know that the sort of semi-sci-fi story we got over here just didn't feel at home in a Streets of Rage game. The game's overall difficulty was also altered for the English version, with the game's normal setting apparently being significantly more difficult than even the Japanese version's hard setting. You also can't complete the game in easy mode. You see, for me this is a problem because I don't think you should make a game like the Streets of Rage games really hard to finish. I don't think the replayability should come from effectively trying and failing again and again. I think the idea should be score-based. I think that if you make it so that your average player can get from the start to the end and see the whole game, but think you can go back, do it again and actually get a better score, then there's far more replayability to be had there than if you simply make it so you have to try a million times until you finish it. But one thing that you have to take into account is that video game rentals weren't really a thing in Japan. So they knew that people interested in this would buy it, and they didn't have to think, can somebody finish this in a weekend? Whereas with us, they did think, is somebody going to rent this, see the end credits and then go, that's it, I don't need any more. So yeah, maybe the rental market played some part in that. I think over the years Streets of Rage 3 has kind of gotten a bad reputation. Is it a better game than Streets of Rage 2? No, it's not even near, but it's a competent beat 'em up, and I think if you go into it knowing that you're going to get... I think if you go into it knowing what you're going to get, then in all honesty, it's a pretty good game. Just not as good as the second and fourth entry in the series. And with it commanding quite a high price online for a legitimate physical copy, there are lots of better ways for you to spend your cash. If you want some quality walk-along beat-em-ups. There's a lot of better ways for you to spend your cash if you want some top quality walk-along beat-em-ups. If I was going to give it a score out of 10, I guess I'd settle on around an 8. It's a disappointing sequel, but not a disappointing game, if that makes sense. I do really like the fact that the game has appeared on future things like the Mini Megadrive 2 and compilation collections and things like that, because it will allow people to play it who previously might have been put off by the high cost of a physical copy. But if you're going to spend the money, this thing's like £100, and I think you could probably get the version of Streets of Rage 4 with all the add-on content bunged in for, 30 quid. You could conceivably get a Mega Drive with Streets of Rage 1 and 2 and some other scrolling beat-em-ups for less than this cart actually costs on its own. And I think you've always got to think about that when you buy stuff. You know, we could all bankrupt ourselves. We could all bankrupt ourselves on random video games, but really you want to think about how you're going to spend your money and what you're going to get out of it. I have wanted to do this video for years. I originally reviewed this game back in 2009 when I just didn't have the equipment to talk about it in this depth. I've never taken that video down because I don't believe in taking stuff off YouTube. I believe you should see what people have produced, even the early poor stuff. But I've always wanted to go back to that review and do it justice, and I hope I've done so here. If you've made it to the end of this video, thank you ever so much for watching. I greatly appreciate it. So I'm going to say that's KERR9000 signing off, saying keep on playing those games, take care of yourself and each other. Laters, taters.
A Squaffy Bear production.
Hi, it's KERR9000, the Chrome Faced Man. I'd just like to say thank you for making it to the end of my video. I've got lots of stuff on my channel, my horror house doing horror reviews, games room doing games, sci-fi station. It's absolutely chock-a-block full. I can also be found on the Retro Gamer U forum, which is full of great people, great laugh. At the end of this video there's going to be some little icons to tick if you want to subscribe, a link to one video, a link to a playlist. I'd also like to recommend the wonderful, talented Just Jessica, who does cozy games like Dreamlight Valley, and is my supportive partner. Thank you ever so much once again for watching my video, and particularly if you follow me, thank you for all your support, and have a great rest of your day.